The United States has approximately 3,143 counties and thousands of incorporated communities, and a significant number of them are either already empty or heading there faster than anyone is comfortable admitting. Some were abandoned by the specific industry that created them. Some were relocated by force, by the government, by rising water, by the ground itself becoming unsafe. Some just quietly ran out of reasons to exist and watched their population leave one family at a time. These are the 10 forgotten towns in America that no one came back to. Number 10, Thurmond, West Virginia. Thurmond in Fayette County in the New River Gorge of West Virginia was once one of the busiest coal and railroad towns on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. In 1910, more freight moved through Thurmond than through Cincinnati. The town had a bank, hotels, a restaurant famous across the region, and a railroad depot that was the economic center of the New River coal fields. The Dunglin Hotel was a legitimate destination, and the C&O Roundhouse serviced the coal trains that moved the New River's bituminous coal to eastern markets. The 2010 census counted 5 permanent residents in Thurmond. By the 2020 census, that number had declined further to 4. The National Park Service administers Thurmond as a historic district within New River Gorge National Park, the park that was designated a national park from a national river in December 2020. The depot has been restored and functions as an NPS visitor facility. Everything else that made Thurmond a town is either gone or in managed preservation. The specific cause of Thurmond's decline was the shift from steam to diesel locomotive power in the 1950s, which eliminated the need for the coaling and water facilities that had made Thurmond's gorge location strategically essential. When the steam engines stopped needing servicing at Thurmond, the economic reason for Thurmond's existence evaporated. The town's natural isolation, accessible at the time only by rail, its roads limited by the gorge terrain, meant no alternative economic activity could fill the vacuum. Thurmond is now one of the most visited locations in New River Gorge National Park by people who appreciate the specific quality of a well-preserved industrial ghost town in an extraordinary natural setting. The 5, now 4, permanent residents who have held on are doing so in the middle of a national park, with no commercial services, no school, and the nearest grocery store approximately 15 miles away by road. The New River Gorge itself, the 53-mile-long canyon cut by the New River through the Appalachian coal fields, was designated a national river in 1978 and redesignated as a national park in December 2020, making it the newest national park in the eastern United States. The redesignation was significant for Thurmond specifically because national park status carries different management priorities and higher visitor counts than national river status, and the increased attention to New River Gorge has produced increased interest in Thurmond as a destination. The New River's coal history, the mines that made Thurmond's railroad function essential, is embedded throughout the gorge's landscape in the form of mine portals, coke ovens, tipple foundations, and the specific industrial archaeology of an industry that lasted approximately 60 years before diesel locomotion and the general decline of Appalachian coal eliminated its reason for the specific geography it had occupied. Thurmond is the most intact surviving community from that era, which is why the NPS invested in restoring its depot. The specific number, 4 residents, is worth sitting with. The town that moved more freight than Cincinnati in 1910 currently houses fewer people than a small apartment building. The trajectory from 1910 to 2025 is the specific story of what happened to the industrial infrastructure of the American interior when the economic reason for its existence moved on and never came back. Number 9, Gilman, Colorado. Gilman sits on a ledge above the Eagle River, approximately 120 miles west of Denver in Eagle County, Colorado. A former zinc and lead mining town built into the cliff face above the river in a physical arrangement that looked improbable when it was built, and looks even more improbable now that it has been empty since 1984. The town was founded in the 1880s during Colorado's mining boom and reached its peak in the early 20th century as zinc and lead production sustained a community of approximately 800 people in a mountain setting with no road access for most of its history. The EPA declared Gilman a Superfund site in 1986, 2 years after the mining operations ceased, due to the contamination of the Eagle River and surrounding soils with heavy metal mine tailings that had been accumulating for decades. The specific metals, zinc, lead, cadmium, produced water quality conditions in the Eagle River that required remediation. The remediation process has been ongoing for decades under EPA oversight. Gilman is visible from Interstate 70, which runs through the Eagle River Canyon below the town. Drivers on I-70 can look up at the cliff face and see the buildings of the abandoned town. Houses, the community hall, the company store, still standing on the ledge above them. The town is fenced and gated, with access prohibited due to the Superfund contamination status. It has been privately owned and has been the subject of various redevelopment proposals that have not materialized. The buildings sit, visible and inaccessible, above one of the most heavily traveled highway corridors in the American Mountain West. Number 8. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia appears on this list for completeness, but its story is specific enough that it warrants inclusion even in a list where it has appeared before. The coal mine fire beneath Centralia has been burning since May 1962. The population of approximately 1,000 in 1980 has been reduced to between 5 and 15 current residents holding legal life tenancies negotiated when the state bought out the majority of the population beginning in the 1980s. What makes Centralia specifically belong in the "no one came back" category is the mechanism of departure. Residents did not leave by choice in the usual sense. They were relocated through a combination of state buyout offers, the documented health hazards of carbon monoxide venting from surface cracks, and the specific event of Todd Domboski, a 14-year-old who fell through a suddenly opening sinkhole approximately 150 feet deep in his own backyard in February 1981 that demonstrated the urgency of evacuation to residents who had been reluctant to believe the mine fire was truly dangerous. The zip code was revoked in 2002. The official street address of Centralia has effectively ceased to exist in postal terms. The coal seam that feeds the fire has an estimated 100 to 250 years of remaining fuel. The people who will eventually be the last residents of Centralia are almost certainly already living there now. Number 7. Cahaba, Alabama. Cahaba, Old Cahaba, as the historical site is known, was the first state capital of Alabama, chosen in 1819 when Alabama was admitted to the Union as the 22nd state. The town sat at the confluence of the Cahaba and Alabama rivers in Bibb County and was selected as the capital because of its river access and its central location in the new state's geography. The Alabama state government operated from Cahaba from 1820 until 1825, when the capital was moved to Tuscaloosa after severe flooding demonstrated the specific problem with building a capital city at the confluence of two unpredictable southern rivers. The town continued as a commercial and agricultural center after losing the capital, reaching a peak population of approximately 3,000 before the Civil War. After the war, the combination of Reconstruction-era economic disruption, persistent flooding, and the completion of railroad lines through other routes contributed to a steady population decline that was essentially complete by the 1870s. Cahaba was formally abandoned by most of its remaining population in 1866 after a catastrophic flood. Old Cahaba Archaeological Park is now managed by the Alabama Historical Commission and preserves what remains of the original town site, primarily the cemetery, some foundations, and the specific landscape character of the river confluence that made it both a promising location and an impossible one. The magnolia and wisteria that were planted by antebellum residents have grown over the ruins and created a specific Southern Gothic atmosphere that has made Old Cahaba one of the more photographed historic sites in Alabama. The Alabama state legislature's decision to move the capital to Tuscaloosa in 1825 was not primarily about flooding. It was about the specific political competition between different Alabama regions for the prestige and economic activity of the capital location. The flooding was a convenient justification for a decision that had multiple political motivations. The capital eventually moved again to Montgomery in 1846, where it has remained. Cahaba's specific Civil War history adds another dimension to its story. The town was the site of Castle Morgan Prison, a Confederate prisoner of war camp established in 1863 in a warehouse district along the Cahaba River. Castle Morgan held Union prisoners under conditions documented as poor even by Civil War prison camp standards. Overcrowding was extreme, with a facility designed for 500 prisoners, sometimes holding over 3,000. Disease and inadequate food and water produced significant mortality. Castle Morgan was officially closed in 1864, but its specific history as a site of documented suffering adds weight to the already atmospheric ruins. The cemetery at Old Cahaba, which includes the graves of both the antebellum residents who made the town and the 19th century victims of the floods and diseases that destroyed it, is maintained and visited by descendant families who make an annual pilgrimage to the site. The specific combination of founding ambition, repeated catastrophe, and southern landscape overgrowth makes Cahaba one of the more contemplative historic sites in the American South. Number 6. Bodie, California. Bodie is the California State Historic Park ghost town in Mono County, approximately 75 miles southeast of Lake Tahoe in the eastern Sierra Nevada, at an elevation of 8,375 feet. The highest and most isolated of California's major gold rush towns. The Standard Mine struck gold at Bodie in 1876 following an 1859 initial discovery, and the subsequent boom produced a town of approximately 10,000 people at its peak in 1879 and 1880, with 65 saloons, a significant lawless reputation, and the specific combination of extreme altitude, brutal winters, and concentrated wealth that defined the Sierra Nevada mining boomtowns of the late 19th century. Bodie is preserved in a state of what the California State Park System calls arrested decay. The buildings are stabilized against further deterioration, but not restored, producing the specific visual of a town that looks like it was emptied relatively recently rather than over a century ago. The Bodie Methodist Church, the Standard Consolidated Mining Company stamp mill, the Miners' Union Hall, and approximately 100 other structures remain from the approximately 2,000 that existed at the peak. The Bodie Curse, the documented tradition of visitors who take rocks or artifacts from the site reporting bad luck until they return the items, is the most tourist-oriented aspect of Bodie's legacy, but it reflects a genuine and documented phenomenon. The park receives returned items in the mail regularly, often with letters apologizing for the removal and describing misfortunes attributed to the theft. The park's ranger station reportedly maintains a file of these letters. Whether the curse is operative is not the point. The specific behavior pattern of returning stolen items to a ghost town is genuinely unusual and is well documented. Number 5. Kennett, California. Lost under Shasta Lake. Kennett was a copper smelting town on the Sacramento River in Shasta County, California, that no longer exists above the waterline. The town was deliberately flooded in 1942 when the Shasta Dam, part of the Central Valley Project federal water infrastructure, was completed and Shasta Lake filled behind it. Kennett, along with the communities of Coram, Baird, and portions of the town of Shasta, was inundated by the rising reservoir. The specific character of Kennett's disappearance is the permanence. Unlike communities relocated by buyout or by natural disaster, Kennett is simply not there anymore in any physical sense. The reservoir that covers it is approximately 517 feet deep at its maximum depth. The town that had approximately 4,000 residents in its copper smelting heyday is underwater and will remain so as long as Shasta Dam operates. The decision to flood Kennett was a federal infrastructure decision made in the 1930s and 1940s under the Bureau of Reclamation's Central Valley Project, which prioritized agricultural water delivery to California's Central Valley over the preservation of several small communities in the Sacramento River Canyon. The communities were compensated and relocated. The buildings were cleared or left to be submerged. The physical town became a memory within a lake that now provides water to the most productive agricultural region in the United States. During California drought periods, when Shasta Lake's water level dropped significantly, the submerged portions of Kennett have occasionally been visible from boat level, the tops of the old rail bridge supports, and a few foundation remnants emerging from the waterline and then submerging again as the lake levels fluctuate. Number 4, Tyrone, New Mexico. Tyrone in Grant County, New Mexico, approximately 15 miles southwest of Silver City, was a company town built in 1914 by Phelps Dodge Corporation for the workers of its copper mine. And it was not a standard company town. The architect was Bertram Goodhue, who had designed St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and who would later design the Nebraska state capitol. Goodhue designed Tyrone as a Spanish colonial revival village, with a formal town plaza, an arched arcade, a church, a depot, a hotel, and residential streets arranged around the central plaza with genuine architectural intention. The town was described at the time of its completion in 1915 as the most beautiful company town in America. It existed for 6 years. Copper prices collapsed after World War I, and Phelps Dodge closed the mine in 1921. The town was simply abandoned, the buildings left standing, the formal plaza emptied of residents, the architectural intention of one of America's most prominent architects left to deteriorate in the New Mexico desert. A second Tyrone was built nearby in the 1960s when Phelps Dodge reopened the copper operations as an open-pit mine. That Tyrone is an active community today. The original Bertram Goodhue Tyrone was eventually demolished in 1967 to clear the land for the expanding open-pit operation. One of the most architecturally significant company towns in American history was destroyed not by abandonment alone, but by a combination of abandonment and the eventual need for the land it occupied. The specific irony of the Goodhue Tyrone story is the commissioning decision. In 1914, Phelps Dodge, a company that had been building functional, utilitarian company towns across its mining operations for decades, hired one of America's finest architects to design something genuinely beautiful for its New Mexico copper workers. Bertram Goodhue's design drawings for Tyrone show a community conceived with the specific Spanish colonial revival aesthetic he was developing simultaneously for the Panama, California Exposition of 1915 in San Diego. Tyrone was an architectural statement, not just a housing solution. The workers who lived in Goodhue's Tyrone for its 6 operational years lived in a community whose plaza, arcade, and church were designed with the same attention to proportion and regional architectural tradition that Goodhue would apply to the Nebraska state capitol, completed 1932, and St. Bartholomew's Church in New York City. The specific experience of living in a genuinely beautiful designed environment, even as a copper miner's family in the New Mexico desert, is the part of Tyrone's story that makes its demolition feel like more than just an economic casualty. The photographic record of Goodhue's Tyrone, taken before and during demolition, is preserved in archives and has been the subject of architectural history scholarship. The images document a company town that was genuinely extraordinary, built for an industry that lasted 6 years in that form, and demolished to make way for the industrial process that the town had been built to support. Number 3, Stampede, Texas. Stampede, in Navarro County in north-central Texas, was a small farming community on the Texas and Pacific Railway that reached a modest peak in the early 20th century and was then effectively wiped out by the completion of Navarro Mills Lake. an Army Corps of Engineers flood control reservoir completed in 1963. The community of Stampede was in the reservoir's inundation zone, and its residents were relocated through the standard Corps of Engineers buyout process that preceded reservoir construction throughout the mid-20th century American dam building era. Stampede joins a category of American towns whose specific fate was determined not by economic forces or natural disasters, but by the federal government's decision to build water infrastructure on the land they occupied. The Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation built hundreds of reservoirs between the 1930s and the 1980s, and each reservoir required the clearance of its inundation zone, farmland, homes, cemeteries, and in some cases, entire communities. The communities that were displaced by reservoir construction were typically offered fair market value for their property, relocated through organized government processes, and are today remembered, if at all, by historical societies, by descendants of the displaced families, and by the occasional glimpse of old foundations or fence posts that emerges when reservoir levels drop below their normal range during drought periods. Number 2, Rhyolite, Nevada. Rhyolite in Nye County, Nevada, approximately 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas near the California border, was one of the most spectacular boom and bust towns of the early 20th century American West. The Bullfrog Gold Strike of August 1904, made by Shorty Harris and Ed Cross near what became Rhyolite, triggered a gold rush that brought an estimated 10,000 people to the area within 3 years. By 1908, Rhyolite had electric lights, a stock exchange, multiple newspapers, an opera house, a school, and a train station. The Southern Pacific and Las Vegas and Tonopah railroads both served the town. By 1911, the population had declined to approximately 675. By 1920, Rhyolite was effectively empty. The gold ore that had sustained the rush turned out to be significantly less productive than the initial excitement suggested, and the combination of disappointing mine output, the 1907 financial panic, and the abrupt withdrawal of banking credit that followed produced a town abandonment so rapid that it generated its own contemporary documentation. The ruins of Rhyolite are accessible to visitors and include the remains of the 3-story John S. Cook Bank building, which opened in 1908 and was described at the time as the most impressive bank building between Salt Lake City and San Francisco. The Porter Brothers store ruins, the Rhyolite Depot, restored and used as the area's interpretive center, and the Tom Kelly Bottle House, constructed from approximately 51,000 glass bottles by a local gold miner, are the primary surviving structures. The Goldwell Open Air Museum, adjacent to the Rhyolite ruins, adds a specific contemporary dimension, a collection of large-scale sculptures installed in the desert by Belgian artists in 1984 to 1986, including a ghostly white silhouette installation called The Last Supper by Albert Sukalski, which has created a specific surreal juxtaposition of 20th century gold rush ruins and contemporary art in the Nevada desert. As photographer and Nevada desert historian Michael Kotis, who documented the ghost towns of the American West, described Rhyolite. Rhyolite collapsed faster than it rose. The people who built the bank and the opera house had every reason to believe they were building a permanent city. The gold said otherwise. The specific timeline of Rhyolite's rise and fall is almost implausible compressed. The Bullfrog Strike was August 1904. The Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad reached Rhyolite in December 1906, 2 years after the strike, reflecting how rapidly the town had grown to a size that justified railroad construction. The John S. Cook Bank, considered one of the most architecturally significant buildings in Nevada, when it opened in 1908, opened 4 years after the town existed. It operated for approximately 3 years before the mine failures and credit withdrawal that followed the 1907 financial panic emptied the town. The 1907 financial panic, triggered in part by a failed stock manipulation attempt by copper magnate F. Augustus Heinz and the cascade of bank failures that followed, was the specific external event that turned Rhyolite's marginal economics into catastrophic ones. The mining operations at Rhyolite were already producing less gold than the promotional materials had suggested. The credit withdrawal that accompanied the national financial crisis removed the financing that was bridging the gap between projected and actual production. When the financing left, the mine operators left, and when the mine operators left, everyone who had been supporting them left too. The Bottle House, Tom Kelly's construction of a residence using approximately 51,000 Adolphus Busch beer, wine, and mineral water bottles, completed in 1906, is the most documented surviving structure in Rhyolite, and the one that most clearly communicates the specific character of the town's brief existence. A man built a house from the discarded bottles of what 10,000 thirsty gold miners had consumed, and that house is now the most durable thing they left behind. Number 1, Picher, Oklahoma. Picher, in Ottawa County, in the northeastern corner of Oklahoma, is the most thoroughly abandoned and most environmentally catastrophic American town on this list. The community was part of the Tri-State Lead Zinc Mining District, one of the most productive lead zinc mining operations in the United States, operating from approximately 1913 through the 1970s. At its peak, the Picher mining district produced approximately 1/3 of all the lead and zinc used in U.S. military munitions during World War I and World War II. The mining produced specific and catastrophic environmental consequences. The chat piles, the mountains of mining waste that surround Picher, contain 70 million tons of lead and zinc contaminated material that has leached heavy metals into the groundwater, the soil, and the creek systems that run through the community for over a century. Blood lead levels in Picher children were documented at rates far above national averages for decades. The entire community was declared part of the Tar Creek Superfund site, the first, and for years, the largest Superfund site in the United States. In 1983, the federal government offered buyouts to Picher residents beginning in the late 1990s, and the vast majority of the population accepted and relocated. By 2009, the official population of Picher was approximately 20 people. Hurricane season accelerated the final departures. An EF4 tornado struck Picher on May 10, 2008, killing 6 people and destroying a significant portion of what remained of the town. The combination of the tornado and the ongoing buyout program effectively ended Picher as a functioning community. Oklahoma formally disincorporated Picher in 2013. The chat piles remain. 70 million tons of lead-contaminated mining waste are not easily removed, and the cost of full remediation exceeds what has been allocated or spent. The school closed. The last businesses closed. The last residents left. The physical infrastructure of a town that once had approximately 14,000 people stands partially demolished and partially intact in a landscape that is one of the most contaminated in the United States. The specific timeline of Picher's end makes the story more specific and more human than the statistics suggest. The Tar Creek Superfund designation came in 1983, but federal remediation funding was slow, inadequate, and ultimately incapable of addressing contamination of the scale that had accumulated over 60 years of unrestricted mining waste disposal. For 2 decades, people raised children in Picher, while documented blood lead testing showed elevated levels in a significant proportion of the child population. The specific consequences of chronic childhood lead exposure, reduced IQ, learning disabilities, increased behavioral problems, are documented in public health literature and were being produced in Picher while the remediation discussions continued. The Oklahoma State Legislature voted to allow the buyout program to proceed in 2006. The federal government allocated $86 million for the buyout of approximately 900 properties. By 2009, 95% of property owners had accepted. The ones who remained longest were typically elderly residents who had lived their entire lives in Picher, who had no other community, and for whom the relocation offer did not compensate for what they were leaving behind. The last resident to hold out, John Sparkman, a retired pharmacist who remained in Picher into 2009, was described in news coverage as living alone in an effectively empty city, receiving mail at an address that no longer had neighbors, in a community whose infrastructure had been dismantled around him. He eventually left. When he did, Picher was over. The Tar Creek watershed, the stream system that runs through the Picher area and carries heavy metal contamination into the Grand Lake of the Cherokees downstream, remains an active environmental concern. The downstream contamination of Grand Lake, one of Oklahoma's major recreational lakes, is a documented ongoing consequence of the Picher Mining District's legacy that will persist for generations, regardless of what happens to the surface-level chat piles. 10 towns, a railroad depot with 4 permanent residents in a national park, a cliff-faced town visible from the interstate that no one can legally enter, a state capital drowned by its own rivers, a Bertram Goodhue masterpiece demolished for an open-pit mine, an entire community on the bottom of a California reservoir, and a town that survived a Superfund designation, a tornado, and a buyout program to finally disappear one family at a time. America is full of places where the future arrived and then immediately left. Hit that like button and subscribe. More content like this coming.